Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Twyla Williams, and I love research. This week, we are going to talk about different data sources. We have talked about all types of designs in this particular series, but today I want to talk about some data sources because, if you think about what we've talked about before, every week I've given you an idea of what types of data sources may go with which types of qualitative designs. Remember that for qualitative studies, we call the collection instruments data sources. When you get to quantitative, they will be called instruments. But for the most part, data sources are always labeled or aligned with qualitative research. So I want to welcome you to today. So as doctoral students, understanding a variety of qualitative data sources available to you can profoundly enrich your research and provide you with some diverse perspectives on the topic. And so let's dive in and talk a little bit about this. So first of all, let's talk about the famous interview. The famous interview. I've talked about this every week, but there are some common types of interviews, and I'll just kind of break those down. I referred to them, but really didn't go into detail as to what the differences were. So let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, first of all, we have the structured interview, and these involve a fixed set of questions, and there's little room for deviation. Okay, in a structured interview, they're very beneficial when you need to do comparable data across participants, but it may restrict your deeper insights. So just think about that when you're talking about a structured interview. More commonly, you hear about the semi-structured interviews. And these are interviews that combine a mix of prepared questions and opportunities for open dialogue. And so the researcher can then probe a bit different into specific responses, allowing for a richer data collection. Okay, so these are used more often. There's also an unstructured interview, and in these, you don't hear about them quite as often, but the conversation kind of unfolds naturally and it's guided by the participants' responses. You can get some really, really good qualitative insights with these unstructured interviews, but it does require a high skill set to facilitate those to really get some meaningful data out of it. So that's probably for more seasoned researchers. So when conducting interviews, it's very essential for you to build rapport and create an environment where the participants are going to feel comfortable sharing their thoughts and their experiences with you. And so it becomes this type of emotional connection, which can lead to richer and more nuanced data. And again, you can do it through the unstructured, you can do it through the semi-structured or the structured type of interview. So you need to decide which one is works best for you. When it comes to interviews, I do need to also say that interviewing is a skill when it comes to research. Please do not make the assumption that because you speak to people all day, you may even be a professional speaker, and you interact with people every day, even as if you work in human resources. I will tell you it is quite different when you are in research, and that interviewing skill is a muscle that you have to build and you have to practice because interviewing is a research skill set and it's not something that we do regularly. So please use those interview protocols and practice, practice, practice on interviewing. The second type of data source we'll talk about are the focus groups, and they are very valuable to qualitative research also. Focus groups involve also guided discussions with a small group of participants. It's not one-on-one, and typically it's about 6 to 12 people. I don't like to go that high because of the group think, and there's too much noise when you have that many. So I try to keep students within 6 to 8. In these particular conversations, they share common characteristics we talk about characteristics that are relevant to the research topic, and they are able to come in and give their opinion on what's going on there. But there's some key aspects of focus groups that we need to bring to attention. There's some dynamic interaction that needs to happen there. This group setting, it encourages the participants to interact and build with each other as far as their ideas are concerned. And that's going to provide this breadth of opinions and perspectives, which is okay. Another thing about focus groups is the facilitator's role, and that happens to be you. The researcher acts as a facilitator, guiding the conversation while allowing these organic interactions to emerge. And again, this is a skill set that you need to practice because you can't interject your own opinion, biases, or even thoughts, but you still have to try to facilitate the room and make sure that the discussion is effective and that the focus remains intact on the research objectives, and that we don't allow certain group dynamics to come into play where maybe some dominant personalities may overshadow those who are a little bit quieter. So we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak, because if we don't, it can potentially affect the richness of the data that you're collecting. So you need to think about that. And also for focus groups, we need to think about the rich data collection, okay? That collaborative nature of the focus group often is going to lead you to some unexpected insights and some comprehensive understanding that you may not have gotten with one-on-ones, okay? And so that's why focus groups are a very, very important type of data source. The third type of data source we'll talk about are observations. Observations. And so, again, another key qualitative data source. Observational data is collected through some direct engagement with the research setting or the subjects. And there's several types of observations that you can do, just like there's several types of interviews. There is a participant observation. And in this approach, the researcher immerses themselves in the community or the phenomena being studied, okay? And we talked about that in ethnography. The firsthand experience from doing this leads into deeper insights into the social dynamics, behaviors, and concepts. And so there's this participant observation for the researcher, and then there's non-participant observation, which is done more commonly. And here the researcher just observes without direct involvement. This method may minimize, bias in some cases, but it also can limit the richness of the data. So you need some other data sources going on with this, because to get to that deeper engagement, you have to understand with non-participant observation, they know they're being observed. And so sometimes that particular data source needs to definitely have others surrounding it to give it some validity and reliability. And then the last part of observations that we can talk about is the systematic component of observations. Researchers might develop a structured framework or a checklist to systematically observe specific behaviors or events. And this approach balances the structure and flexibility of the qualitative data connection. So sometimes that's just a combination of both. The systematic way to do it, not used as often, but it is a way to try to resolve the part of the non-participant observation where people know that they're being watched. So you can kind of maybe consider that. But overall, observational data allows the researchers to capture context and social interactions that may not be readily articulated through interviews or surveys. It provides a fuller picture of the phenomenon that's being studied. So observations are a really good data source. We can also talk about document analysis, and that's another significant type of data source. In document analysis, it involves reviewing text or documents revealing or information on your subject. It has to be relevant to your subject, but revealing information or data that you can extract. And there's several ways or types of document analysis that you can do. The first type is you can use primary sources, and this would be primary document analysis. And this is where you use original documents, thus the primary, such as letters, diaries, reports, photographs. All of these can provide some rich qualitative insights into people's thoughts, experiences, and historical context. Okay, so those would be considered primary sources. There's also secondary sources. And these would be things like articles or books or reports that analyze or summarize the primary data. Analyzing a secondary source can offer some meaningful insights into existing literature on your topic. You do need to be careful with this in a dissertation and speak with your chair, though, because there are some limitations on non-primary data. And so you need to make sure that this is applicable to your study when you do this. Another type of document analysis would be online content with our new age here, with the prevalence of digital context, analyzing social media, posts, blogs, and online forums that can yield some essential information about public opinion, about behaviors, about trends, about what's going on. So, a very important type of analysis. So, document analysis allows the researchers to take this information, triangulate it from multiple sources, and kind of enhance the depth of the research question. However, it's essential to assess the credibility. Remember that. And the relevance of the documents you are going to try to attach to your study or that you're going to use. This will help you to ensure that your analysis is rigorous. The last data source I'll talk about is audiovisual materials. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, but it is a data source. Audiovisual materials can include things like video, films, podcast, photographs, other forms of media, and they can be utilized in a couple of ways. So videos and films, let's talk about those. We can analyze recorded videos or interviews. We do that anyway before we transcribe. We analyze those. We can also analyze things like documentaries or other video content. It will provide some insight into some nonverbal communication that we may not have written down, some context, and even emotions that we can't necessarily see on pen and paper. So that's very important. Audio visual for photographs. What does that look like? Well, that's some visual data that can capture some moments. It can capture settings. It can capture cultural artifacts. This can offer a powerful narrative that complements the verbal data. I've done some studies with students that are from different tribes, native tribes, and they use a lot of this, especially because they are so protective of their cultures. And so sometimes they have to use photographs to help to advance their research. So photographs can be used as prompts to interviews also. And this can lead to some rich discussions, just looking at the photograph and asking questions about it. That's a fun way to collect data. And then we can also use audiovisual materials when we look at these podcasts and audio recordings. And so we do that when we listen to the narratives, discussions, or interviews, and it can provide a deeper understanding beyond just the text. And so audio materials also allow researchers to focus on tone. You can focus on inflection, up and down the voice, or even emotion behind the words. Again, very similar to what we said earlier when we were talking about looking at the videos and films. So when working on audiovisual, with audiovisual materials, a robust analysis framework is crucial so that you can extract that meaning and conceptualize the findings effectively. But it is a very, very good data source. Okay. So in conclusion, if we utilize qualitative data sources, they can significantly enhance our research when we're doing that. And so that's why they're a requirement for our studies. And remember, I want you to remember that each qualitative design that we've talked about is usually associated with certain types of data sources. Not always, but most common. And so keep that in mind when you're thinking about which ones apply to your study. When we think about each data source, it gives us some unique insights depending on what it is, and whether that's through direct participant perspectives, whether that's through our observational nuances, whether it's textual analysis or multimedia content. Here's um, some information that we've talked about that can help you. So just to give a quick recap of what we talked about today. I know it was a lot of information in today's video, but we talked about interviews, okay, interviews, and we talked about structured, semi-structured, and unstructured formats of the interview. Focus groups, we talked about collaborative discussions that generate collective insights. Observations, we spoke about participant or non-participant engagement with the research context. Document analysis, reviewing of primary and secondary text relevant to the topic. And audio-visual materials. And that's the examination of videos, photographs, and audio content to gather some rich narratives. So as you embark upon your qualitative research journey, consider how each data source can contribute to your inquiry and help you to answer your research questions. Thank you for participating in today's session. I hope this overview has equipped you with some ideas of how to explore various data sources effectively. Again, I am Dr. Twyla Williams. Until next week.